What if you paid for a first-class seat, but were told, without a glance at your ticket, that someone like you didn't belong there? What if the person saying it worked for you and didn't even know it? This is the story of a woman who turned quiet humiliation into a reckoning that changed an entire airline. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The airport was buzzing the way it always does around 3 p.m. at Lambert International in St. Louis. The sound of suitcase wheels dragging across tile floors, boarding announcements echoing through the halls, and the occasional impatient sigh filled the air around Gate E7. The line for first-class boarding was moving slowly, a quiet murmur of chatter and rustling jackets marking the scene. Marcel Duval stood near the velvet rope dividing the first-class line from the rest. She didn't fidget or check her watch like others. She just stood there, calm, collected, a well-worn leather satchel slung across one shoulder, her coat a simple gray wool blend that had seen a few winters. Her hair was neatly tied up, her expression unreadable. She didn't look like the other passengers waiting to board. Most were dressed in tailored coats, polished shoes, luggage that gleamed. Marcel's boots were scuffed at the toes. Her face was bare, no lipstick, no concealer, just eyes that had seen too much and learned to say little. She clutched a boarding pass, Aurelia Air, Flight 224 to Chicago, Seat 2, First Class. Across the gate, Sheila Langford spotted her. Sheila had worked for Aurelia Air for over 20 years. She wore her uniform like armor. Navy blue blazer buttoned all the way up, name tag gleaming, and her blonde hair pulled into a tight twist that hadn't changed since the early 2000s. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Marcel inch forward in line. Sheila lifted her radio and muttered something short into it. No one around her paid attention. Most people were too buried in their phones, their coffee, or their own lives to notice how some things shift in the air before they break wide open. Marcel stepped forward as the gate agent waved the next passenger through. When her turn came, she handed her boarding pass over, but before the scanner could beep, Sheila stepped between her and the gate. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This line is for first-class boarding only." Marcel tilted her head slightly. Her voice when she spoke was even and gentle. "Yes, I know. This is my boarding pass." She held it out again. Sheila glanced at it, but not long enough to actually read it. Her lips tightened. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. We'll sort this out in a moment." A couple behind Marcel exchanged glances. A man 2 spots back shifted uncomfortably and looked away. A woman in a cranberry-colored coat stared hard at the floor. No one said a word. Marcel didn't move. She didn't raise her voice or argue. She just stood there, spine straight, eyes steady. "Is there a problem with the seat?" she asked, "or just with me?" Sheila didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her radio again. "I have a potential impersonation issue," she said into it. "Passenger refusing to cooperate." Marcel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take when you've been here before, when you've seen the moment someone makes a choice, not because of facts, but because of what they see when they look at you. Within 2 minutes, 2 uniformed airport security officers approached. One of them, younger, looked uncertain. The other looked tired, like he'd done this too many times. Marcel turned to them calmly, her hands relaxed at her sides. "She thinks I don't belong in first class," she said, "but I do." They didn't reply. They just asked her to follow them for clarification. Before she turned, she looked at Sheila, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with something deeper, something quieter. "I expected better," Marcel said softly, "but I've learned to stop expecting." She walked away without raising her voice. No scene, no shouting, just the sound of her boots on the tile and the silence that followed in her wake. Behind her, no one said a word. A few heads turned, but most went back to scrolling, sipping, pretending. The camera above the gate kept rolling, red light blinking, capturing every second. Marcel didn't look back. She learned that sometimes looking forward was the harder thing, but the stronger one. Marcel sat on the hard bench just outside the security office, her coat still buttoned up, the chill from the hallway seeping into her shoulders. She hadn't spoken since they let her out of the boarding area. The young officer who escorted her had offered water. She declined with a soft shake of her head. The hallway was sterile, all beige tile and humming fluorescent lights. She looked ahead, not at the two-way mirror or the camera in the corner. Her hands were folded over her lap, fingers laced loosely, like she was waiting for a bus instead of being held for verification. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She pulled it out, read the screen, and typed 4 short lines. Saint Louis. Boarding gate E7. Incident. No need to intervene yet. She didn't send it to a lawyer, didn't call anyone in the press. She sent it to one name, an internal contact, someone in the loop but just far enough outside of it to let things breathe. She'd seen worse. The memory came without her asking. She was 9, maybe 10. Her mother had taken her downtown to buy school shoes. They sat on the front bench of the city bus. No one else was on it. When the driver turned, looked in the rear view and barked, "You can't sit there?" Her mother stood up without a word and led Marcel to the middle row. No shouting, no complaint. That night, Marcel had asked her why she didn't argue. Her father had answered instead, "Sometimes your silence speaks louder than a room full of shouting." Now, sitting in that hallway, she felt the same stillness. Not quiet exactly, just deliberate. Across the airport, in a corner office behind tinted glass, Darren Vexley was finishing his second cup of bitter coffee. He'd been on back-to-back meetings all morning and was about to take 10 minutes to breathe before catching his shuttle to Chicago. Then his phone buzzed. A text from airport operations, first-class passenger conflict, gate E7. Security involved. He sighed. Gate conflicts usually meant someone had tried to sneak an oversized bag through or refused to check their dog. He was mid-sip when the second alert came in, this time from corporate. Subject, executive alert. Location, St. Louis, gate E7. Passenger, Marcel Duval. Level, red. He froze. Darren wasn't new to corporate panic. But this was the name he'd seen on that new executive onboarding doc just last week, the one they'd all been briefed on in hushed tones. He turned to his assistant, who just walked in with a printout. "She's here?" he asked, voice low. The assistant nodded slowly. "Apparently boarding to Chicago, got flagged at the gate." Darren rubbed his temples. "That's her. The new one. The one the board just signed on last week." Jesus, he stood up, already dialing his direct line to ground security. Back in the hallway, Marcel sat still. The door opened, but she didn't flinch. She looked up as Darren stepped in. No badge, no uniform. Just a suit, tie loose, eyes wide and weary. "Ms. Duval," he said, careful not to rush. "I'm Darren Vexley. I oversee this region." Marcel gave him a single nod. Her tone was level. "I figured someone would come, eventually." He didn't sit, didn't offer excuses. Just said, "I'm sorry." She didn't respond right away. Then, "You're not the one who stopped me at the gate." "No," he said, "but I am the one who's responsible now." Silence hung between them. Darren knew better than to fill it with promises or spin. She wasn't the type. "I'll make this right," he added, quieter. "But I need to understand exactly what happened." Marcel looked him in the eye. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't confusion. She saw me, and she didn't think someone like me belonged in that seat. Darren exhaled, long and slow. There was no defense to that. And worse, he knew she wasn't the first. Just the first with enough power for people to start caring. "I'll speak with the crew. Review the footage. Pull the logs. You'll be on the next flight to Chicago. First class. No interference." Marcel stood, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I'm not looking for special treatment, Mr. Vexley. I just want to know how deep this runs." She walked past him, calm as ever. Darren stood there a moment longer, knowing one thing for sure. This wasn't going away. And it wasn't just a mistake. It was a fault line running under the whole system. And Marcel Duval had just found it, with both feet. The first-class lounge smelled faintly of bergamot and leather, the kind of place that did its best to make people feel expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in the soft haze of late-afternoon sun, and ambient jazz played low enough to feel like a whisper. Marcel sat near the corner, not tucked away, but not front and center either. Her coat lay folded over her lap, her boarding pass resting quietly on the table beside a glass of water. She'd been offered champagne. She declined. Across the room, a young white woman in joggers and a hoodie breezed past the check-in counter. No one stopped her. No one even blinked. She laughed at something on her phone, tossed her bag on an armchair, and helped herself to sparkling water like she'd done it 100 times before. Marcel watched silently, not with jealousy, not even anger, just recognition. Recognition of a pattern. She didn't need someone to tell her there was a list, an unspoken roster of who did or didn't look right for first class. It wasn't written in company policy or printed on any training manual, but it showed up in glances, in posture, in the hesitation before someone said, "Let me see your boarding pass." A young man in a navy vest approached her, shifting his weight as he stood beside her chair. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your flight has experienced a routing issue. We'll need to reassign you to another one. Same destination, just slightly later." Marcel looked up. His badge read, "Jason" in all caps. She didn't ask questions, not yet. "Which flight?" she asked, voice calm. Jason checked his tablet. "Flight 267A, same class. We'll have someone escort you in about 20 minutes. "Right," she said softly. "Thank you." He smiled, relieved she didn't make a fuss, and turned to walk away. Marcel didn't believe him. She didn't think Jason was lying on purpose. But someone upstream had moved a piece on the board, and Jason was just delivering the message. Half a terminal away, Sheila Langford sat in the crew lounge. Her hair was still tight, her uniform crisp, but her shoulders were slightly tenser than they'd been that morning. On her screen, she pulled up the manifest. Marcel Duval's name still sat under Flight 224, but with a quick tap and login, Sheila reassigned it to 267A, then flagged that flight for an operational hold. It was an old trick. If a flight stayed in review status long enough, it would trigger a reassignment to ground processing. She didn't do it out of panic. Not quite. She did it because she'd learned to manage impressions, a phrase she'd heard from a training session years ago and clung to like a mantra. First class had an image. People expected a certain standard. If that meant quietly moving someone who didn't match it, well, it kept the front cabin smiling. Behind her, another attendant glanced at her screen. "Wasn't that woman cleared already?" she asked, voice cautious. Sheila didn't flinch, just shrugged. "Mistakes happen," she said, closing the screen. "But people like that often find themselves in the wrong place." She didn't say it cruelly. She said it like she was reciting policy, which in a way she thought she was. Back in the lounge, Marcel's phone buzzed with a calendar notification, an automatic reminder for her executive onboarding call in 2 weeks. She silenced it. She didn't need the calendar to remind her who she was. She just needed the system to stop forgetting. Darren's voice came through on the internal line not long after. "Ms. Duval, can you meet me near the West Conference Center?" She didn't ask why. When she arrived, Darren was already pacing. "We have a problem," he said, tapping on his tablet. "Your flight was tampered with, twice. Internal override. Sheila Langford has administrative access. She moved your name off 224 and flagged your reassignment flight for a delay sequence." Marcel didn't blink. "She's good at protecting her version of order," she said. "She's done it before. Probably dozens of times." Darren looked stunned. "You knew?" "I suspected." He took a breath. "We'll suspend her immediately. Start an investigation." Marcel shook her head, not to stop him, just to pause the momentum. "This isn't about her," she said. "This is about what she thinks she's supposed to protect." She reached into her satchel, pulled out a small notepad and tore off a piece of paper, wrote something in clean, even letters, handed it to Darren. He read it. "Now we're not talking about one incident. We're talking about culture." He looked at her, and in that moment, Darren understood this wasn't just an HR issue. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The room was small, tucked behind a frosted glass door at the edge of Aurelia Air's St. Louis Operations Wing. It smelled faintly of printer ink and cold coffee. The blinds were half drawn, softening the late afternoon light that spilled across the table. Marcel sat across from Darren, her elbows on the armrests, hands folded, her back straight but relaxed. She looked like someone who had practiced stillness, not because she enjoyed it, but because she'd needed it to survive. Darren broke the silence first. "I'm sorry. I really am," he said, his voice low, almost careful. "This shouldn't have happened." Marcel looked at him a long moment before answering. Her tone was even, without bite or blame. "I've seen this before," she said. "Just not from this seat." Darren tilted his head slightly, not quite following. She leaned back, eyes unfocused for a moment, as if watching something on the wall behind him. "There was a conference in Atlanta, 2011. I was a project manager back then, still working my way up. I had the right badge, the right access, walked into the executive breakout session, and a woman from another firm stopped me, asked if I was looking for catering or setup." She paused. Darren said nothing. I smiled, turned around and left. Didn't correct her. Didn't report it. I figured if I said anything, I'd just be labeled angry or difficult. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. The weight of that memory had already settled in the space between them. "And what happened after?" Darren asked. "I went back to the general session, sat in the back, took notes like nothing happened. No one got called out. She never even knew she was wrong." There was a silence that hung like a ceiling fan with a wobble, steady but uneasy. Darren looked down, then back up at her. "So what do you want to do now?" he asked. "File a report? Bring in legal?" Marcel didn't answer right away. She stared at the edge of the table, tapping her thumb against the wood in a slow rhythm. Then she looked at him and said, "If I wanted to humiliate her, I could. I've got more than enough reason, and now I've got the power too." She let that sit. "But what would that teach the next Sheila? The one who's not mean-spirited, just misinformed, or trained by silence?" Darren sat back slightly, processing. "I'm not saying she should stay where she is," Marcel continued. "But if we want to fix this, really fix it, we can't just fire a few people and pretend we've cleaned house." She unfolded a piece of paper from her satchel and slid it across the table. "I want to rewrite our onboarding," she said. "Start with how we talk about people, who we see as valuable. Train not just for safety and efficiency, but for empathy. Teach staff how to listen, not just follow a checklist. Because if the checklist doesn't have a space for dignity, then it's not worth much." Darren read the paper. It was rough, more notes than plan. Bullet points, questions, a sketched-out program name. Empathy first. He looked back at her. "This is a lot," he said quietly. "You're asking to change the foundation." "No," she corrected him gently. "I'm asking to finally acknowledge the cracks in it." There was no bitterness in her voice, just clarity. She wasn't acting out of revenge. She was thinking beyond it. Darren saw it now. He'd expected to walk into that room and manage damage. What he found instead was someone trying to build something better, not for herself, but for everyone who'd been made to feel small in places they had every right to be. He nodded slowly. "If you build it," he said, "I'll back it, all the way up." Marcel let the faintest smile lift the corner of her mouth. It was the first he'd seen from her all day. "Good," she said, "because I'm not doing this for me." He believed her. In that moment, Marcel wasn't just a CEO cleaning up a mistake. She was a woman who'd carried years of being overlooked, misunderstood, and underestimated, and she was choosing to turn that into something more than a reaction. She was choosing to rebuild. The room smelled like lemon polish and old policy. Long mahogany table, 12 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago's gray skyline. Marcel stepped in with quiet steps, but not uncertain ones. She didn't dress for war. She wore a simple navy dress, sleeves down to the wrist, hair pulled back, no jewelry except for a silver pen clipped to her leather folder. 3 members of the board sat on one side. Darren stood beside the projection screen, tablet in hand. A legal advisor, barely out of his 30s, sat hunched near the corner, typing too fast to keep up. No one said a word at first. Marcel broke the stillness by sitting. One of the board members, an older man with sharp cuffs and tired eyes, cleared his throat. "Ms. Duval, would you prefer we handle this quietly?" Marcel looked at him. No smile, no frown. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "I came here to clean house." No one interrupted her. She opened her folder and pulled out a printed sequence of reports, neatly labeled, timeline highlighted, security logs, passenger data, flight records. She walked them through what had happened, how she had been stopped at the gate, how she had been moved to another flight without cause, how she had not raised her voice, not threatened, not exposed anyone. And despite doing everything by the book, she said, the system still decided I didn't belong. That says more about the system than it does about me. Darren clicked the projector. A list appeared on the screen. He spoke carefully. We found evidence of a shadow protocol, an internal flagging practice, used primarily by senior cabin crew. It's unofficial, unapproved, but highly active. He tapped a few times, bringing up charts. There's a category labeled image risk. Names were flagged based on appearance, accent, even first names. No behavioral violations, just perception. Marcel folded her hands in her lap. And Sheila? One board member asked. Darren nodded. She used this list 14 times in 3 years. Every time the flagged passenger was reassigned or questioned, majority were non-white, most had valid first-class tickets. A silence took over the room. It wasn't the stunned kind, it was the uncomfortable kind, the one that creeps in when people realize something's been happening under their noses, and they let it. The legal advisor cleared his throat but said nothing. One of the women on the board leaned forward. This list, it wasn't approved, but no one stopped it either. Marcel didn't flinch. Then it's time we stop being quiet. She reached for her pen and clicked it softly. I'm recommending we eliminate every internal tool or practice that categorizes passengers by subjectivity. Every last one, from check-in codes to seating adjustments. If a passenger's behavior doesn't warrant concern, they fly as booked. She paused. Second, I want mandatory retraining for all upper-level customer-facing staff, not just on policy, but on empathy, perception, and cultural intelligence. Because if we're not willing to understand who people are, we have no business serving them. A few glances were exchanged across the table. Marcel leaned back slightly. And last, she said, I want the incident made public. Acknowledge it. Apologize for it. Own it. We don't repair trust by hiding the damage. The man who had spoken first stared at the table. His fingers tapped once, then stopped. And if we don't approve that path? He asked quietly. Marcel didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I won't threaten you. That's not my style. But if you refuse to address what we've let happen, then you'll be standing in the way of what I was brought here to do. And I will not stand still. The woman board member looked at the others, then turned to Marcel. We've worked hard to build this airline's reputation. Marcel nodded. And now we have the chance to rebuild it with purpose. There was a pause, a long one. Then the chairman, who'd remained silent the entire time, finally spoke. We'll follow your lead, he said, voice steady. This time all the way. Marcel didn't smile, but her eyes softened. In that moment, she wasn't a victim reclaiming her dignity. She was a leader redefining the rules, not just for herself, for everyone who'd ever been quietly told, without words, that they didn't belong. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing. The walls were pale gray, the carpet dull and forgettable. A single table sat between two chairs, one already occupied by Marcel. No board members, no assistants, no cameras, just a single audio recorder sitting off to the side, blinking red. Record-keeping formality. Nothing more. Sheila stepped in, uniform still on, though the badge identifying her as lead flight attendant was gone. She paused at the door for a second too long, then slowly walked to the chair across from Marcel and sat. Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles pale, eyes flickering between Marcel's face and the floor. Marcel didn't speak right away. She let the silence stretch, not out of cruelty but out of clarity. Sheila needed to sit in it for a moment. Then finally Marcel asked, Why me? Sheila blinked, caught off guard by the directness. Her voice came low, brittle. You looked out of place, she said. She hesitated, swallowed hard. I thought you were trying to cheat the system. I've seen it before. Marcel's face didn't change. No, she said softly. You've seen people like me in places you didn't think we belonged. Sheila's mouth opened slightly, then shut again. There was no argument to offer, not an honest one. The silence returned. Then slowly, Sheila began to speak, less defensive this time. I've been doing this a long time, she said. Years. And I've gotten complaints. Passengers whispering that someone looked out of place next to them in first. Once I had a woman ask me to move her seat because the man next to her was black and had dreadlocks. Marcel's eyebrows didn't rise. She'd heard worse. My supervisor didn't tell me to fix it, Sheila continued. But the way he looked at me, I knew what he meant. After that, I stopped asking permission. I just started protecting the image. Marcel nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in recognition. And you became the problem they never had to name, she said. You did their work for them. Sheila winced. I didn't think of it that way. I know, Marcel replied. That's the problem. Another long pause. The two women sat across from each other, not just manager and employee, not just CEO and flight crew, but two people shaped by different fears and different rules. Sheila finally asked the question she'd been dreading. So, what happens now? Marcel folded her hands, voice even. You won't be flying again. That part's decided. Sheila nodded slowly, as if she'd expected worse. But, Marcel continued, you will be staying, if you're willing. Sheila looked up, confused. What do you mean? Marcel leaned forward, elbows on the table. We're starting something new. Empathy first. A training program for every level of staff. And you're going to be part of it. Sheila's mouth opened again. You want me to teach? I want you to tell the truth, Marcel said. To show others what this looked like from the inside. Not as a warning, but as a mirror. You're not a cautionary tale. You're a living example of what happens when a system quietly rewards the wrong instincts. Sheila's eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly and kept them steady. You'd let me stay? She asked, voice shaking. Marcel answered without hesitation. I'm letting you grow, if you're willing. Sheila nodded slowly at first, then with more certainty. I am, she said quietly. I want to be better. Marcel sat back. Then we begin here. They didn't shake hands. There was no speech, no embrace. Just two people sitting in the quiet again. One carrying the weight of shame, the other the weight of change. They were facing the same direction. The auditorium at Aurelia Air's Chicago headquarters was packed. Rows of Navy uniforms, blazers, name tags, polished shoes. Some leaned back with arms crossed. Some sat upright, notepad in hand. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Marcel stood backstage, listening to the muffled buzz of the room. She could feel the tension through the walls. It wasn't anger exactly. It was hesitation. Resistance disguised as formality. When her name was called, the room quieted. She walked onto the stage without a smile, just steady purpose in every step. No slideshow, no speech in hand. Just her. Before she spoke, someone stood up. Mid-50s, straight posture, silver streak in her bun. A senior attendant from Denver, by the look of the badge. Respectfully, ma'am, she said, voice clear. We were trained for safety, not for sociology. A low murmur followed. A few nods. Another voice chimed in from the middle row. This feels like a punishment for doing what we thought was best. Marcel took the mic, eyes moving from face to face. She waited just long enough for everyone to settle again. I hear you, she said, and I want to be very clear. I'm not here to punish anyone, but I am here to reset the standard. She stepped a little closer to the edge of the stage. You were trained to judge situations, not people. And if you've forgotten the difference, then this program is exactly what we need. Her voice was even, not defensive, not aggressive, just plain truth, delivered like a steady hand on the shoulder. When I walked into that gate in St. Louis, she continued, I wasn't treated like a security risk. I was treated like I didn't belong. Not because of anything I did, but because of how I looked. She didn't name Sheila. She didn't need to. Every person in that room already knew the story. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene, but I felt it. And whether you realize it or not, someone you've served has felt it too. The silence grew heavier, not uncomfortable, but sobering. Marcel paced gently, her heels muffled by the stage carpet. I've read the emails, I've seen the comments. Some of you feel like this is about politics, like we're trying to fix something that isn't broken. She paused, letting the moment stretch. But if we've created an environment where a paying passenger can be labeled a threat because she doesn't fit someone's version of first class, then we are broken. And I won't lead a company that's afraid to admit that. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, slightly worn piece of paper. A boarding pass, creased in the middle, the ink slightly faded. This was mine, she said. Seat 2A, St. Louis to Chicago. First class, printed, paid, confirmed. She held it up. This seat was paid for, but the respect that should have come with it? That's what I'm here to earn, for everyone who looks like me, walks like me, or dresses like me. She stepped forward and laid the boarding pass gently on the podium. And if that makes us uncomfortable, then good. Discomfort is where change starts. For a second, nothing moved. Then a slow clap began, from the back, then the side. Then scattered applause filled the room, spreading like rain on pavement until the sound wrapped around her. Marcel didn't bow. She didn't beam. She stepped down from the stage, not with the air of victory, but with the quiet weight of responsibility. In that moment, she wasn't just the CEO. She was the voice that turned silence into clarity. The classroom wasn't much to look at. Folding chairs, a whiteboard smudged at the corners, coffee in a pump pot that had likely sat too long. But there was something different in the air. Less corporate polish, more honest intention. The kind of place where people didn't just come to learn policy. They came to listen. Sheila stood at the front, both hands loosely gripping the edge of the podium. She looked down at her notes, then back at the faces in front of her. Mostly young, mostly nervous. A few scribbling already, unsure of what this session would be. She took a breath. I didn't just misjudge her, she said. I misjudged the meaning of my job. No one said anything, but a few faces leaned forward. Sheila swallowed hard. When I stopped someone from boarding, it wasn't about their seat. It was about my assumptions, about what I thought first class was supposed to look like. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And when I realized I was wrong, it wasn't just embarrassing. It was humbling. It shook everything I thought I understood about respect. A young man in the front row raised a hand. How did you get a second chance? Sheila's voice cracked, just a little. She didn't look away. Because someone believed even people like me could still learn. At the back of the room, quiet and unnoticed, Marcel stood against the wall. She hadn't been introduced. She didn't want to be. Her hands were folded in front of her, eyes soft, watching, not judging, not checking, just witnessing. Sheila didn't see her until the session ended. By then, the room was filled with quiet chatter, chairs scraping, a few hugs exchanged among new hires. A young woman with a tightly pinned bun and bright eyes approached Marcel on her way out. Ms. Duval, she said, voice full of sincerity, you changed everything. Marcel smiled. Just a little. No, she replied gently. I just asked everyone to look twice. That was enough. A week later, Marcel boarded a flight to Chicago. Same airline, same cabin. She walked through the first-class lane with the same quiet posture she always carried. Her coat folded over her arm, her old leather satchel on her shoulder. The gate agent smiled and greeted her by name, not because of her title, but because it was printed clearly on the pass in her hand. When she stepped onto the plane, a young attendant, new by the look of his badge, smiled and nodded. Welcome aboard, Ms. Duval. Your seat's just here. He didn't linger, didn't stare, just did his job, with grace. She took her seat in 2A. Same number, same row. But everything had changed. She reached into her bag and pulled out something worn and familiar. A crumpled boarding pass, the one from St. Louis. She unfolded it gently, ran her thumb across the faded ink, then opened her notebook. Inside, a page marked in neat handwriting. Chapter 1, Before the Change. She slid the boarding pass between the pages and closed the book. Outside the window, the aircraft pushed away from the gate, engines humming beneath her feet. She didn't lean back in victory. She didn't need to. This seat wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about being seen and letting others be seen too. And this time, No one questioned her place in it. Sometimes the most powerful seat isn't the one you pay for. It's the one you earn by standing up quietly but firmly for what's right. Marcel didn't just reclaim her place on a plane. She helped reshape the rules for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. So what about you? Have you ever been judged before you even spoke? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us what dignity really looks like.